Hello and welcome to the History of Ceramics.
I'm Stephanie Rozene.
And I'm Paul Greenhalgh.
And today, we're talking about a pioneering potter from America's Gilded Age. Someone who helped establish the tradition of art pottery and put American ceramics on the global stage.
The creator, no less, of the pot that's now regarded as the Mona Lisa of American ceramics, the Scarab vase, which was also victim of an audacious art heist.
It was, and we will get there. But I want to mention that for me as a maker, she's very close to my heart. As a maker today in the United States, I'm part of the legacy that she has left behind. She was pursuing making in a studio pottery capacity in porcelain at a time that wasn't the norm. And she paved the way for artists like myself. Not only is she the first woman working in porcelain, a rare early example of this rise of hobbyism, amateur potters, that is someone that's not classically trained.
Yeah.
But she goes on to be a force and a major contributor and professional in the field of ceramics, and we have a lasting legacy from her. This is the story of the remarkable life and work of Adelaide Alsop Robineau. We're going to begin this story today at the end of the 19th century in the United States, which was experiencing a massive amount of expansion, influx of money through the growth of railroads, oil and gas exploration. But what do we know about what's happening in the arts and in ceramics in particular across the world and in the US at this time?
Yeah, well, it's a very particular moment, I would say, Stephanie. It's a golden age, in my view, and in the view of many people, in the decorative arts especially, and architecture. It's a moment of intense creativity with major international movements. For example, the arts and crafts movement, Art Nouveau. And these things were powerful in the States as well as in Europe and elsewhere. So a big moment for developments in the arts from that perspective. But it's also a moment in which we get the phenomenon of art pottery, capital A, capital P. It's a term that comes from that period, and what it means really, rather than the pots changing somehow, it's really a philosophical statement that pottery is art with a capital
Yes.
A. So practices are asserting themselves that what we're making is art. It's not just some minor thing. So very, very important.
And so, amazingly, art pottery is dominated by women. And one of the most important women was Adelaide Alsop Robineau.
Mm-hmm.
And let's tell a little bit about her story. She's
Yeah.
born in Middleton, Connecticut on April 9th, 1865. It's a town in New England, not too far from New York City, about 7,000 to 8,000 people. She and her family don't stay in Middletown long. Her father is a bit of an inventor, an engineer, and he is always looking for the next big thing. And so he moves the family all over the country, back and forth to the Midwest, to the East Coast, multiple times throughout her young life. And it's also in part because he is a bad money manager.
So a financially challenged entrepreneur.
Yes, indeed. And so she's born at this moment of renewal. But she's born into a bit of financial adversity, right? Because of the fortunes of her father, which wax and wane. And so, she doesn't let this hold her back, though. She, as she goes through school, she has an aptitude for art. She learns how to china paint on porcelain. And we find her by 1888 at the age of 23 living on her own in her own apartment in Syracuse, New York, where she's listed in the city directory as Addie B. Alsop, artist.
That's quite amazing, isn't it?
It is. When you think about that time period and women's role in society and that you weren't really allowed to go out without a chaperone,
Yeah.
she's living by her own. Her mother and her sisters are living nearby. But she's living and making her life as an artist. And so we know that the way that she was supporting herself was through china painting. And so let's take a minute to have a technical note on china painting. We could describe it as an overglaze enamel, but then, of course, what does that mean? It is essentially taking ceramic pigments and painting on top of an already glazed pottery object.
So you have a fired pot.
Yes.
And then you paint it.
Essentially.
Yeah.
And then it goes back into the firing for an additional sort of set to fuse those pigments together.
Right.
And we know that china painting is considered an appropriate profession for women at this time.
That's fascinating, isn't it? Because we realize that ceramic practice, and it wasn't on its own, practice throughout the visual arts, but interestingly in ceramic, there's a division of labor.
There is.
Based around gender. China painters tend to be women, which is very, very interesting.
Right. And so we're looking at today a woman who does that, who begins sort of outside of the academy, is self-taught, and moves on to be one of the great American ceramic artists. And so she wants to become better. She wants to explore moving away from china painting and to become an artist. And she does this in the 1890s, moving to New York City. So we can already maybe make an assertion that she's quite determined.
Yep.
She lives on her own. She moves as a single woman to New York City, and she enrolls in some studies with well-known painter of the day, William Merritt Chase. And she wants to be an artist. And it turns out that she's quite good at painting, and her work is accepted into several of the annual Art Academy exhibitions.
Yeah, and we should say, Chase, he was a big fish at that time, one of America's leading painters. So she was stepping in at the top there.
She was. But sadly, because of her family fortunes, or lack of family fortune, she has to turn back to china painting to earn a modest income. But we can see from this early moment that she has big ideas.
Yeah.
She's ambitious. And so while in New York, she meets an equally ambitious partner. And this is a Frenchman named Samuel Robineau, who was 9 years older than her. And they had actually met some years earlier when the family was living in the Midwest. The story goes that he had some holdings in North Dakota, and he was at a moment that he could try something new.
And also, unlike her father, he's an entrepreneur.
He's an entrepreneur.
Who does know how to make money.
Yes, and he is he's an aficionado. He's a connoisseur of Asian ceramics and of French ceramics.
Right.
And so they marry on March 4th, 1899. And celebrate their partnership, not with a grand party, but by starting a business together. So we're here at this moment, turn of the century, fin de siècle, and she and her new husband start a business, and that business is a magazine business.
Do you think we can say, even at this stage, because we're pretty early still in this woman's career, that she's displaying what she became internationally known for? She's an entrepreneur.
She is.
And she's got a shrewd idea of how one would perhaps become an artist and live and survive.
Yes. And I don't think she's willing to accept no for an answer. And she has these, as you say, grand ideas that she's going to pursue. No one's going to stop her. And it seems that she's found a partner who is willing to support that attitude, those ideas. And so they start a ceramic magazine, and they incorporate it in Syracuse, New York.
Right.
Syracuse, New York, to which they then relocate to in 1901, is along the Erie Canal between Albany, Rochester, Buffalo. Buffalo is the interior shipping corridor for North America at this time. And so the railroad has expanded, there's shipping and industry. Syracuse at this time is 108,000 people around the turn of the century, 1901.
Which is a good size, I guess.
It's a good size. And Syracuse has its origins because there was a large deposit of salt that was found near Lake Onondaga. And the Onondagan are the indigenous peoples of that region of upstate New York. And so they were familiar with that salt deposit many years before colonists arrived and started exploiting those mines in the 1700s. They're moving to a place that's vibrant.
Yeah, I find that whole area at that moment incredibly interesting because Syracuse, which is less well known now, I would say, as a center of artistic practice, but it was very important then.
Yes.
And a range of the avant-garde were living there and
Yes.
promoting it.
And it's a hub of the American arts and crafts movement.
Yeah, absolutely.
The famous furniture maker Gustav Stickley is there.
Yeah.
And so this magazine they start is called Ceramic Studio Magazine. Tell us a little bit about why we are saying ceramic instead of ceramic.
In effect, what it does, it refers back to Keramakos, the ancient Greek site where classical ceramic actually began. So what they're doing by using ceramic rather than ceramic is rooting themselves in the Western tradition. They're giving themselves status by tying themselves up to the classical world. And it's esoteric. It's knowledgeable, isn't it? It's showing that they know what ceramic is, one would say. Connected to that as well, they're very shrewd. We're in the age of magazines here. There are magazines popping up on everything you could humanly conceive of. But the art world was full of magazines across the board, and it was a known way of promoting, marketing, establishing, teaching. So a golden age of the magazine, and they step in.
They do.
Yeah.
And it's successful right out of the gate.
Right.
In her lifetime, she earns her living from the magazine. I think the figure is something around, she earns only about 10,000 US dollars in selling her pots in her lifetime, but she earns a steady income through the entire run of this publication from this magazine. And that's because it teaches women how to become better china painters. It expands on the technical aspects of working with clay. It essentially teaches you how to set up a ceramic studio and be a home potter.
So your perception that there's a slant towards promoting women as artists and practitioners?
Yes, 100%. And she would have been very aware, as coming up as an artist, as a young china painter, of the already previous texts that were out there on, there were handbooks on how to become a china painter. And what's exciting about her in this position, she's editor-in-chief. She's not just organizing and reviewing the content of the magazine, she's writing. And she's writing something in every single publication. She writes columns, editorials, she reviews exhibitions. There's reports about local societies and meetings around china painting, this hobbyism. And she's also sharing designs for china painting ideas so that people can improve their china painting. And we know that she's also still china painting at this point,
Right.
because her work is exhibited as a part of the Paris Expo in 1900.
Gosh, so she's coming on at pace. It would seem that she's got slight control issues here, I would say, Stephanie, in terms of her being at every level of what she's up to.
Which does not seem like a bad thing here.
No, I think it's absolutely commendable, because if she doesn't do it, who is at that stage? Given
And I think she maybe had some frustrations that this kind of thing didn't exist for her.
No, I think it's incredibly powerful. We should quickly say something about the importance of being in this grand expo in Paris. It's the age of expos, exposition, and there are major World's Fairs, expositions all over Europe and America happening, and enormous attendances and hugely important events. We, of course, still have expos in our world, but they have nothing like the significance of them. And the Paris 1900, arguably the greatest ever expo that was staged. And this young woman is in it, which is quite extraordinary. Just to give our readers a sense of how big these things got, 51 million people visited the Paris 1900 fair at a time when the population of France was only 38 million.
Yeah.
So the work got seen by tens of millions of people. And I think as any museum professional, I'd be quite happy with an attendance of 51 million people in 6 months for a show I'd done.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what I want to mention about those world fairs is that China painted objects can't win awards yet.
Right. Yeah.
Women are allowed to enter their China painted objects in, but they're still in a separate class from the famous art, as it were, that's being produced by the male dominated art worlds. And nonetheless, the work that's on display of hers in the World's Fair here, or the expo, it's quite an important achievement. But she's not taking home prizes at this point.
No.
And maybe I think that might be in part to do with the fact that she just didn't like China painting. And her husband, Samuel Robineau, once wrote, "Here's the thing. Mrs. R did not like China painting, but didn't know where to start."
Isn't that interesting, Just? It's a footnote also that, just to acknowledge, there are a range of powerful women coming through in those decades, asserting in different ways. So start, before Adelaide was going strong, and then she joined this group of powerful.
Yes, she's not the
cultural
first.
figures. She's not. So fascinatingly, at the Philadelphia Expo in 1876, we get the first women's pavilion,
Yes.
where a group of women put up their own building and put their stuff in it as a way of gaining entry into these major events. We should also, in terms of entrepreneurship, these events were also trade fairs. It's where money was made, as well as just being a show. So a woman's building in 1876, another one in 1893 in the Great Chicago Expo. And then from that point onwards, we tend to get women's buildings in all these exhibitions.
And so she was growing up at a time where she was being empowered by these decisions of these older women.
You bet. There were role models around her.
Absolutely. And so we're going to find her at 1901, the year that she makes her first porcelain object from start to finish.
Right. A seminal moment, I guess.
Seminal moment. So she visits the studio of her friend Charles Volkmar outside of New York City, and she makes this small, short vessel with a dark blue glaze. It has piercings around the top. And I wouldn't say it's a masterpiece, but it is certainly within the style of Art Nouveau. And there are these incredibly detailed carved beetles adorning the outside of this short, squat, lumpy vessel.
Right.
And so it forecasts to us her ability and facility with a material that she has no training in.
Right. So not a bad start.
Not a bad start. And so she makes a decision. I think working with this clay was her aha movement of, oh, this is what I've been looking for.
Right. And it's porcelain.
And so her friend and contemporary potter, Frederick Hurton Reed, a Brit, writes, Mrs. Robineau decided to switch from China painting to porcelains. And this switch, may I add, is about as rational and as possible a vocational change from dentistry to cello playing. But a little thing like this would not disturb Mrs. Robineau.
We should drop a footnote in there that Frederick Reed was a major player also in the ceramic world. A Brit who came to live in the States, but a major figure.
Yes.
To be commenting on this young woman.
This statement of it was such a wild decision to move from China painting to porcelain, which I think in a contemporary sense, maybe that's not such a big jump. I might be a person working in ceramics and I might go use some China painting or vice versa. It's seen as just one of many types of skills that you can use. But at this time period in 1901, it's as radical a decision from going from dentistry to cello playing.
And not many dentists do that, let's be honest. Love them as we do.
No, but it's a radical choice. And this is part of, I think, rooted in her ethos as a person. And so let's also just say another sort of technical moment that she's working with porcelain. And for our listeners, porcelain is a white clay body. It's the purest, cleanest white clay body. It's probably filling your granny's cupboards.
Yeah.
Porcelain has a long history of kind of capital and tradition, and it's notoriously tricky to work with. It's a material I work with in my studio. But I learned how to work with clay by using other clay bodies before coming to porcelain.
Right.
It cracks easily. It shrinks a lot during the firing process.
Yeah.
It is not very flexible. And so it's a tricky business.
So she didn't make life easy for herself.
No.
What about her training at this stage? She's self-taught at this stage.
She's self-taught. She's touched clay. She's relocated to Syracuse, and she's said to her husband, Samuel, I want to open a pottery. I want to open a studio. I want to be an artist who makes ceramics from start to finish, and I want to do it with porcelain.
Mm-hmm.
And so she goes to Alfred University in Western New York, Alfred University and the New York State College of Ceramics, as it's known today.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the top ceramics program in the country.
Mm-hmm. We should tell our listeners, Alfred is a watchword for excellence in ceramics. It started then.
Yeah.
It's still one of the top
It is.
places in the States and arguably in the world for training in ceramics.
It is, yes.
So
And
yet again, she inserts herself at the top.
she does. And so she takes a 2-week summer class with Charles Binns, one of the founders of that program.
Yeah.
In 1902 to develop some technical skills. And so the audacity of her to think that in 2 weeks she's going to learn everything she needs to learn about clay working is really amazing. And so she learns what she can in these 2 weeks and returns to Syracuse. But she needs to develop a clay body. It's not like today where you can walk into the local ceramic supply store and pick up your bag of clay, your box of clay, you pick out your glazes and materials and tools. Porcelain did not exist outside of the factory or industry model at this point.
Right.
And so she had to not only develop her own clay body, but she had to find the material ingredients and source those from production mines across the United States. And so she does this by writing to one of the top French potters in the world, Taxil Doat.
I find this incredible at this stage.
Yes.
She writes to this man, Taxil Doat, who's working away in Paris. We would say one of the top ceramic artists in the world.
And
at
he's
that
not just
stage.
working in Paris. He is one of the top potters at the Sèvres manufactory, which is the national porcelain manufactory of France.
Absolutely. It's France's great factory and manufactory for producing porcelain. And he's there as one of the top dogs.
Yeah.
And internationally renowned. So we have this young woman writing to Taxil Doat, the Elvis Presley of ceramics, I might say. And he writes back.
He does.
So he sends 100 pages back in English.
In French.
In
He
French,
sends
right.
this treatise back, over 100 pages, and he sends them. And lucky for Adelaide, we'll remember that her husband Samuel is French.
Absolutely. Very useful.
Very useful in this context. And so he writes back and he shares his recipe for porcelain and all of the technical information that goes with that. The importance of the material, the main ingredient in porcelain is a clay called kaolin.
Mm-hmm.
He indicates that you must have these ingredients, but the importance of firing this clay body to high temperatures, which is where it develops its glassy-like material. And this is incredible because the history of porcelain recipes has been extremely secretive. And what's even more remarkable is that she has this treatise translated, and she together works with her husband, Samuel, to publish this essay or series of essays based on his writings in Ceramic Studio magazine. And so not only does that information get disseminated to her individually, she then goes and shares it with the rest of her readership, right?
So we immediately have here a slight political sense of promoting the field for women, amongst other, promoting it generally, but there's no doubt that she wants the entire field to shift, and
She
not
does.
least on a gendered basis. So we've got a woman who has a political as well as an entrepreneurial sense.
She does. One has to have such a belief and willingness to sort of forge that path while I'm sure it wasn't easy, and we know that she had lots of failures through trial and error.
Yeah.
So it's not as though everything she touched was marked by gold, right? And that's the arc of being an artist. And so we know she's revolutionary in that way. She's pioneering, and she's not only pioneering for this, incredibly short sort of turnaround to success in working in porcelain. We also know that she's one of 3 people in the United States at this time who are working in and developing what we call crystalline glazes. And crystalline glazes, let's first just say, glaze is a melted layer of glass on the surface of a ceramic object.
Right.
And typically there's at least 2 firings in a kiln, which is the type of furnace that we use in ceramics. The first firing we refer to as biscuitware, where it goes from being clay and being transformed by heat into a ceramic object. And that biscuitware is still quite porous. It's kind of like a hard sponge.
Yeah.
And glaze is applied, it soaks into those pores, and we pop it back into the furnace and we heat it up to high temperatures. The glaze melts and the clay body vitrifies or becomes glass-like.
Right.
And so crystalline glazes are a type of glaze that need to be cooled very slowly. And as they cool, crystals actually grow out of the surface of the glaze on top of the glaze. They're magical. They look like snowflakes. They look like flowers blooming across the surface. And so even today, people find these glazes very tricky to work with. And she's one of 3 people doing this at the turn of the century. So there's one that I'm thinking about in the Everson's collection, which is this small bottle form that's quite round on the shoulder. It's kind of tan and pinks. Comes to this sort of miraculously small and delicate opening. And the crystalline structure on the glaze is springing across like snowflakes. It's completely delicate and mesmerizing to see these objects in person.
There's a very intense attention to detail. Do you think also we've got somebody who's become adept with porcelain and is working away as an individual, which is also an interesting phenomenon we can come back to. But, going back to her poor father, who managed to not make a living, but he was an engineer stroke scientist. And I always wondered with Adelaide, her control of chemistry and of physical properties of materials. She had that technological dimension to her, didn't she?
She did. And I think, anyone who's working in ceramics knows that you also need to be a chemist and a geologist as well as an artist in order to solve the studio's problems, as it were.
Especially then.
But these pieces they're so lovely, they're so soft, they're intimate, they're small. And so she is not only set up her own studio, but she's investigated, or she's invested in continuing to push herself, to take on new challenges. And so I'll put it to you, Paul, is she the first studio potter?
Now that's an interesting thought, isn't it? And hugely interesting for the entire history of ceramics. What we mean by the idea of studio pottery is this phenomenon of effectively the potter becoming rather like a painter or a sculptor, in a sense of having an individual studio and doing the whole process oneself. In the American context, I can't think of anybody before her who...
Well, I think we could think of one, which is George Orr.
Absolutely.
But I think in the context, we could...
Contemporary, though. Yeah.
We could contextualize her as the first female studio potter working in porcelain, which is a very exciting thing to be able to say at the turn of the century.
I would say definitely she's that. And we'll come back to the 1 or 2 others like George Orr, but it's about the same moment, isn't it?
It is.
And he has the same thought. I'm an artist.
I'm an artist. And that's what separates us from this factory model where ceramics was only seen as a utilitarian functional object. And now we're taking this medium and these vessel objects and we're calling them art.
Yeah, and hence the term art pottery. So in a male-dominated practice, she embodies the idea of the individual potter in the early
Yes.
20th century.
Yes. And she becomes a driving force in the development of American art or studio pottery.
I might add, I think she is more important than anyone else, including George Orr, who we'll speak about at other times, but a great eccentric individual. Adelaide's running a magazine.
She's running an empire.
Yeah, she's in World's Fairs. She's got 51 million people in France looking at her work.
Right.
She's out there changing the shape of things. So, yes, she's got an empire, and that makes her a unique phenomenon, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And Adelaide and Samuel Robineau are invited to relocate from Syracuse, New York to St. Louis, Missouri, and she's about to create her greatest masterpiece, the Scarab vase. But before she does, she moves again to teach at University City, established by the Women's League of America, an organization that was working to provide education and skills for women. She's there with other top teachers, Taxil Dowat, our Frenchman, who shared the recipe for porcelain, English-born Frederick Hurton Reed, who made mention of her radical decision to move from china painting to porcelain.
So we're talking top team here.
Top team.
It doesn't get better than Taxil Dowat. And Reed, a very big figure in the ceramic world at this stage.
Yes, and they build a whole entire ceramic studio, kilns, clay making area. Each one of them has their own studio to pursue their own artistic practice. And they're there because they are going to be instructing young middle-class women with marketable skills so that they could go out and have some sort of profession. And this was a growing trend of organized education for women across the U.S.
It's interesting, isn't it? There are two things happening here, that the pushing of education for women is clearly, it's more powerful in the States than anywhere else that I'm aware of. And also, it's an interesting footnote. It is the age of the art school. New art schools are popping up. So nothing unusual that there's a new art school in St. Louis, because they were popping up everywhere in the States and in Europe as well. So again, it's a moment of its time.
It is a moment of its time. And so she's there. She's setting up a curriculum to teach women how to decorate their work, because once again, she's still working within the confines of this male-dominated structure, that the men were there to be the throwers and the clay makers and the kiln firers, and the women are there to decorate. But the fact that she's there as a woman and a teacher surrounded by these men is quite remarkable. And so she begins a body of work while she's teaching there that she would ultimately show and exhibit at the World's Fair in Turin, Italy. And this includes the Scarab vase. And the Scarab vase is arguably her masterpiece. And this vase is about 17 inches tall. It is white and pale bluish green. It's using a sort of celadon type glaze. So she's referencing her knowledge of Chinese ceramics. It's adorned with scarab beetles, which are hundreds of scarab beetles are wrapped around this vase. It's in 3 parts. It has a small base, a lid, kind of a conical shape in between.
So we're saying it's clearly one of her iconic masterpieces, but typical of what she was up to at this time.
Well, I think that this one was a bit of a departure. Remember that she's been working in crystalline glazes.
All right.
She has been embarking on a trajectory of carving into the surface of porcelain. And so let's just take a moment to talk about carving.
Surely this is a very rare thing to be happening in this medium.
That's right. And ceramics, or clay, let's say, because if we remember that the material is clay and the object after its firing is ceramic, that clay is malleable when it is wet. It has water in it. And as that object starts to dry, so on the potter's wheel, you would throw the object, making the form, and then you need to let it set up before you can do any sort of fine tuning to the form. And so carving takes place at a consistency which we in the ceramics world called leather hard,
Right.
which I like to describe to my students as being the consistency of chocolate.
Right.
And so if you could imagine taking a small loop tool and carving into it to remove material, this is part of this process. So most likely it would have been started with her drawing the pattern all over the form, and then slowly and meticulously with very small tools removing some of that porcelain surface. So it's a reductive process. And porcelain, unlike other clays, can really be carved once all of the moisture has been evaporated from it to a consistency we call bone dry, which I think kind of evokes an interesting connotation. And so this bone dry clay with porcelain, because it's such a refined material, you can continue to kind of scratch and etch and remove very small bits. But the challenge here is that you can carve too much away and you could carve right through the surface.
I was going to say, I always thought that leather hard or bone dry porcelain was very fragile. So
Yes.
immensely skillful.
Immensely skillful, and bone dry is even more fragile than leather hard.
Right.
And so she carves these little beetles, and they're scarab beetles, or perhaps also known as the dung beetle. Scarab beetle sounds much better than dung beetle to me. But they're tirelessly, their whole job as a beetle is to encase their eggs in dung and sort of encapsulate them so that they're protected and they can then go on to hatch. And so she's carved these beetles, rising their dung, these little circles of dung above their heads as they're climbing up to the top of this vase. The name that she originally named it is the apotheosis of the toiler. And so it's this tireless effort of raising these encased eggs towards the light.
Mm-hmm. So she's carving dung.
Well, she's carving porcelain.
Right. It must have taken some time.
It did. She actually spent over 1,000 hours carving this vase, which makes my hands and my back hurt just thinking about it.
1,000 hours.
1,000 hours.
That's over 120 days.
It is. And she made this work between 1909 and 1910. So in the span of 1 year, she has created this masterpiece. It's also quite a marvel because most ceramic objects are fully encased in glaze at this time period. You would put a glaze over the surface of the porcelain to give it a color,
Right.
to give it a protective layer, to help reduce bacterial growth on the inside of a vessel that's in use. But she puts glaze just on the raised edges of where she's carved. And so when you look at this vase up close, you see both the raw porcelain and you see this subtle light blue glaze just sort of on the top edges. And it's a really marvelous object to behold.
So a celebration.
A celebration.
Of porcelain
Yes.
as a material.
Yes. And so we've mentioned that ceramics goes through several firings. And it's that first firing, the bisque firing or the biscuit firing, where things can go awry.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ways things can go awry is if your work still has water in it and you heat the clay too quickly, it can explode and it can shatter. And so there's some trepidation of not knowing, if this thing that you've made will make its way all the way through the firing process. The Scarab vase makes it through, but it comes out with some catastrophic cracks in it.
Whoa.
Yeah. Can you imagine spending 1,000 hours and then having an object come out cracked and broken?
We all know about potter's heartache.
Yes. The ceramic casualties. We've all had them.
Absolutely. This is a big one, I would say.
This is a big
as
one.
Heartache goes.
It is. Early in people's careers, there's a lot of this, but then you figure out how to use material and there's less so. And so it must have been a bit heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
It's said that Taxiel Doat said, it's too bad, but it's impossible to fix. And Samuel Robineau recounts that Adelaide laughed out loud and said that she would fix it or throw it in the bin. that there was no in between for her. Again, we see her determination coming forth. And so she meticulously mixed up, ground up bits of porcelain with some of that glaze enamel and spends hours filling all of these cracks with this material and refires it and gets it all to fuse together. And today you can look at this object and there's no evidence of these cracks.
I was going to say, Stephanie, I've peered at this object a few times.
Yeah.
I didn't notice any flaws in it at all.
No, and I have to say it's extremely difficult to do this and make it seem seamless.
So, tenaciously, she creates. It seems to me also that quite often, the original term masterpiece was to do with apprentices who, after years of training, would make their masterpiece and become part of the profession, whatever it was. There's something almost literal in this, that she self-consciously set out, it seems to me, this thing, 1,000 hours of carving. She clearly had something in her head that she was going to make something special, and that stepped out.
There's this incredible picture that exists out there in the world of her sitting there in her full, dress, carving this vase. A tremendous amount of skill is on display here.
It's wonderful.
And so this is only one piece that she's making in this year or so. She's made a whole other range of work. So about 50 objects, including the Scarab vase, she sends off to the World Expo in Turin in 1911.
All the top people in the world were there. All the top ceramic artists were there. And of course, right across the media, they were all there at this World's Fair.
And because she's not China painting anymore, she's allowed to enter her ceramic work into the categories which allow her to be eligible to win prizes.
Right. So how does she do?
Well, she takes the grand prize. She wins the whole thing. She wins the Grand Prix of the Turin Expo of 1911. This is miraculous. This is an incredible achievement, not just because she's a woman, but because she's also the first American potter who has ever won a grand prize at an international exposition.
It's extraordinary, and it's quite hard to believe that could be achieved. Not, as you say, not least by an American who, at this stage, Europe's still looking down its nose at American
it's a
art.
bit backwater. They can't possibly have great ceramics.
Absolutely, but a woman as well. Really quite extraordinary, and a massive, massive achievement. And without any doubt, shifts the position of American ceramics.
It shifts the position of American ceramics, and it shifts the position of her in the world. She has essentially arrived. She's made a place for herself in the history of ceramics.
And a vase that had been repaired.
And yes, it has been repaired.
So that all the judges and all the other ceramic people couldn't tell. This is a level of technicianship and skill unheard of, I would think. Yeah, unheard of. So, massive achievement. She comes home. What happens next?
Well, she's also raising a family. In those 1,000 hours of carving, she also has 3 children between the ages of 4 and 10 running around.
As you do.
As you do. And so she is really doing it all. However,
in 1911, University City closes
due to some financial mismanagement, the end of the French potters' contracts. And through this entire period, she and Samuel have continued to publish Ceramic Magazine, which we'll remember is their sort of steady income. And so with the closure of
University City,
she and Samuel and their family move back to Syracuse, New York, where she begins to work in their pottery that they had established, teaching classes, offering instruction for makers, and continuing to make her own work.
And remains, the Syracuse program remains one of the top American programs.
That's right. She's invited in 1920 to teach at Syracuse University. And even today, it's one of the top 10 programs in ceramics in the United States.
Indeed it is. So another landmark in ceramic education.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so she's continuing to lead the way. But now she has She's firmly established herself as a university professor, and she's working within the academy as opposed to outside of the academy solely. And so she's been accepted as a professional in her field. She'll go on to continue making work and sending it out to exhibitions, always planning what the next body of work is. But sadly, in 1928, she develops an aggressive cancer and passes away in 1929. She never stopped planning for the next body of work. Even when she was quite sick, she was drawing up plans for her next exhibition. And so, what an extraordinary life that, in my opinion, was cut far too short. She was 65 when she passes.
So, an incredible life, and a life cut short, I would say also. One can only say that she dies 1929, that there's an exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum late in that year. Very rare did that ever happen. Then, very rare that would happen now, that an artist would be recognized in that way by America's greatest museum.
Yes.
So we know how she was felt about at that moment.
Right,
Yeah.
right. You don't, most artists don't die and get a memorial exhibition at the Met.
No.
No.
In the year they die.
In the year they die.
Yeah.
And
You've
so,
only got to pass away a couple of 100 years, you know.
well, and so she was such in control of her own destiny, even so much that she designed her own funerary urn.
If it weren't melancholy and sad, it would be slightly humorous that we have someone who plans her life so well and looks to the future so enthusiastically that she plans her own funerary monument, and for her and her husband, I believe.
Yes.
Now, for me, it's an extraordinarily beautiful object.
It is. It's a gorgeous object.
And it reveals, it's got a simplicity and a purity to it, which is really quite a move on from the
It is.
earlier
And
carved
so,
works.
Shall we describe it a little bit? It's quite tall, about 3 feet tall, or almost a meter in height. And it's quite sort of narrow and comes up into a tall kind of conical shape. It's alternating black and white with some a bit of carving into it of these kind of what looks like to me almost like drips of white dripping down the black. And so it's quite a departure from these earlier pieces that are absolutely rooted in the historical Western canon of ceramics.
I couldn't agree more. If you looked at it in the raw, first of all, you know, it couldn't be before 1920. It's got all that spirit to it. But in actual fact, it would be comfortable in the 1960s.
It would. And it reads like a monument.
Yeah,
it reads like a marker. It does not read like a jar.
Now, we have to say also that she's in there, isn't she?
She is. Yes, she and her husband Samuel's ashes are intermixed and inside her cinerary urn, which she, I think, lovingly called her last firing, her final firing, and it's on display at the Everson Museum of Art in Syracuse, New York, along with the Scarab vase.
It makes one shudder slightly to know that she's in there.
Honestly, until doing the research for this discussion, I didn't realize she was inside. I've seen that piece many times. It's a beautiful piece. I did not realize she was inside. And
I
now
have no
I have to
idea,
go back.
and I think it's yet another first, I would say.
I need to go back and visit and make a bit of a pilgrimage and, I don't know, come and bring an offering of some kind. But I thought we could sort of close this chapter by reading a reflection from Carlton Atherton, who was Adelaide's final studio assistant, and he wrote posthumously in 1935. Mrs. Robineau learned a complicated craft despite almost overpowering obstacles. There were sorrows and frustrations, but never a dearth of courage. The struggle was laborious, but it carried on with a quiet, determined assurance. She accepted the challenge and won. What a life.
What a life. But this story isn't quite finished yet, is it?
No, it's not, because in 1989, the Scarab vase was stolen from the Everson Museum of Art. It's a cold Monday in upstate New York, in Syracuse. I think it was the 13th or 14th of February. And the museum had closed for a luncheon with board members and patron circles. And so people are coming and going in and out of the museum for this event. And this is not an unusual thing.
No.
No. For the museum to be closed and to be entertaining these people. It wasn't until the next day, while the director of the museum was giving a tour, that it was noticed the Scarab vase was missing. It was not under its vitrine. In fact, another piece on display was in its place.
85% of art thefts go unsolved and the objects do not come back. So it's tragic because it's stealing from the public, in my view. But normally when things go, they don't come back. So there was a real fear that the vase wouldn't resurface for decades, if ever.
Right. And so immediately the police, the FBI were contacted, and it became clear that this theft was one of many connected to a ring of thefts of different institutions from Chicago through New England.
Which is not unusual as well.
That they're all linked together.
Yeah.
And so they sprung into action. They sent out pictures and curators to New York City with images of the Scarab vase to scour antique shops and try and see if there was any chance of recovering this object. A board member put forth a $25,000 reward for the museum. There's a Scarab vase wanted image that is fantastic, but they couldn't figure out how it was stolen and what had happened to it. It turns out that our thieves were not masterminds. They made all of these thefts. You know, the 1980s is a time perhaps when museum security is not as robust as it is today. And so the Scarab vase did not have an alarm on it. It was screwed down with 4 screws, a plexiglass vitrine over the top of it. And they walked in, they unscrewed those 4 screws, put them in their pocket, lifted off the case, and took the Scarab vase. I imagine this, I don't know, I feel like they should be wearing trench coats or maybe big winter coats, and they kind of tucked it under the lapel of their coat, and off they went. Remember that this is in 3 pieces. There's a lid, there's a base, and then there's the vase jar section, main body itself. And so it's disappeared. So we find our thieves now in Brooklyn, New York. And they are trying to sell off all of the things that they've stolen. And
so they were the pair that stole from the museums.
Yes. So there's a pair of them. We know they're from Brooklyn, and they're trying to sell off these objects. And so they approach an antiques dealer in New York City to sell off a series of watches that had been stolen from the Baltimore Museum of Art. And in the conversation with this antiques dealer, sales going pretty well. He says, well, right, why don't you leave the watches with me and come back for the money tomorrow? And they said, oh, great, this is going really well, but we have these other things. And so he pulls out a stack of Polaroid pictures, images, and starts, showing him other Chinese vases and things, and shows him an image of the Scarab vase. And he's offering it for $100,000. And this is a priceless art object. In the 1980s, probably valued around $500,000. And our antiques dealer is none other than David Rago, who is the porcelain ceramic specialist and host of the American version of Antiques Roadshow.
So not the person to choose, really.
Well, it shows us how uneducated perhaps they were about what they were trying to sell or the value of it. And so if he, of course, sees that vase, knows it shouldn't be in a Polaroid, it should be in the Everson Museum. And so after making this deal to get these guys to come back the next day, he calls the FBI. When our thief returns the next day, he's wearing a disguise, using a fake ID, and he is arrested. The way that he is connected, other than just having an image of the Scarab vase, there's no fingerprints in the Everson. There's no DNA material evidence to link this thief with the theft. When the police are searching the home of his ex-wife, they find a second Polaroid of a picture of their 8 or 6-year-old son holding the Scarab vase, which is just, I mean, I can't even imagine. It sort of just like makes my bones jitter to think that it was so sort of carelessly looked after.
So we're not dealing with geniuses
No,
here.
we're not. And
Rather, we're dealing with Laurel and Hardy. And now, just remind me, didn't they FedEx the vase
They
from
did.
Syracuse
So
to Brooklyn?
They're careless with this object. They FedExed it from Syracuse to Brooklyn, maybe in an attempt to not be charged with transporting stolen goods. I don't know. Somehow it makes its way through this trip through the shipping industry in one piece. It's kind of bonkers to me. And so it is eventually returned. Our thieves go to prison for several years. And it takes over a year for the Scarab vase to return to display at the Everson because it's tied up in this court case, and they also need to check it over to make sure that it's not cracked or broken in any way.
And perhaps in the meantime, the two thieves are doing pottery classes in prison?
I have no
we don't
idea.
know, yes.
I'm happy to report that it is securely displayed, complete with anti-earthquake protections and an alarm. And to see this piece in person is an absolute marvel.
It's a blessing to all of us and we're very confident it will never happen again.
And I would invite anyone who's able to come and look at this piece in person at the Everson.
So here we are. We've got this extraordinary legacy of this artist. And the great thing about art, as we know, is that the artists often live on, don't they, through their work.
They do.
So the first major female ceramic artist to make an international impact, we would say, despite the fact that we know in history there were many women involved in ceramic. It's Adelaide who really breaks through. Never lacking in self-confidence and a great entrepreneur.
Yes. And she would work to convince the director of the Everson Museum, then called the Syracuse Museum of Art in 1915, that Syracuse has at least 2 unique boasts to make. There is the salt, which gives it its savor, and there are the Robineau porcelains, which may sound very conceited for me, but which is true nevertheless. And so that is her writing to the museum director to say, you should collect my work into your collection because I'm the best. And she was not afraid to say so.
I love it. So there we are. Adelaide Robineau, a true hero of ceramic history. To find out more and to see the podcast in full with images of the pieces we've been talking about in this episode, go to the HENI Talks YouTube channel or visit heni.com/the history of ceramics.